Well, what's really funny about Summer is, and she even said to me, she's like, I've never played anybody like this before, and she was sort of like, so when do I get to punch somebody? And, what's interesting about Summer's character, because even though Isabelle Rochev is a character from the comic books, she's actually a nemesis of all of her queens, far more than she's a nemesis of the Arrows. One of the big story arcs this season is that the company that Summer represents is trying to take over Queen Consolidated, because Queen Consolidated took a massive PR hit, considering that they were the company that built the machine that killed 503 people. So Oliver really has to step in and become the CEO. So with Summer, there's a lot of banter and jousting and sparks flying and anger and yelling, and it's sort of a fun, different dynamic than we've ever had on the show.
So you're saying they're going to get together at some point with those sparks?
Just because sparks fly doesn't mean people are going to get together.
You mentioned escalation. How does that kind of reflect in the world of villains for Arrow?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
You mentioned escalation. How does that kind of reflect in the world of villains for Arrow?
I think that some of the villains that are, some of the villains that are showing up this season are I don't want to say caused by the vigilante, but like, some of the villains of season 2 have sprung up in the wake of either the vigilante's absence or because of what he did, which is sort of a new thing for Oliver to have to grapple with. That it's sort of the classic, which came first, the heroes or the villains, and this season Oliver has to face some of the consequences of him going out and putting on the hood and fighting crime last season. But then we still have just some sick, twisted, crazy creeps.
Journey.
Osmo Shinji. He starts out the season, he doesn't want to be the vigilante anymore, and by the time he comes back, he doesn't just pick up the bow again. He decides he wants to be a hero. The last season was all about revenge, and it was all about, very Hamlet-esque, sort of like, driven by the ghost of his father. And this season, he's also driven by a ghost, but it's the ghost of Tommy, who died not thinking the best of Oliver. So this season is less about sort of atoning for his father's sins and more about honoring the kind of man he wanted to be for Tommy. So it's interesting because last season had a very dark, objective, which was like crossing names off the list, which is, in a way, he was like a hit man. And this season he puts the book away, and it's really about being an example and being a symbol, and he's going to discover that that's not so easy.
Does Oliver?
Well, he's dismayed to discover that Roy Harper is hell-bent on being his ally, whether he wants him to be or not, which, is a really fun arc for the season, because, Oliver has to go from not liking Roy at all to seeing that he's kind of a good influence on his sister to, oh crap, I've got to keep my sister's boyfriend alive. So that's sort of fun for him, and the first batch of episodes, there's a new female vigilante in town, whose identity will hopefully be a surprise to many, but who's will turn out to be another ally, which will be a fun story.
I was actually going to ask on that note. There's been so much tease that the Black Canary is coming. So what can you tease about?
Like with a lot of the characters last season, the first iteration of someone that we met didn't necessarily turn out to be the comic book version of it. Like, if you think about it chronologically, the first man to wear the green hood that we saw was Yao Fei. And, the first Deathstroke that we saw was not Slade Wilson. And, we met Tommy, and I think a lot of people assumed that he was going to be Merlin, and then we revealed that it was really his father. So, the Black Canary that we meet, that her identity is a mystery, but it's really the beginning of the Black Canary story. And, we always say we have two sets of fans. We have the fans who are comic devotees and the fans who couldn't give a crap. And, we have to please them both. So, sometimes I think that, the comic book fans, in our attempts to make the show entertaining for them, sometimes misjudge which way we're going to go on something, but I think hopefully we've shown, over the first season that, we're as big comic book fans as anybody, and, sometimes when we do things, we always have a plan, and the Black Canary storyline is something that's going to play out, over the course of the entire season.
So is there still a possibility we'll someday see Laurel in fishnets?
Who wouldn't want to see Katie Cassidy in fishnets? Well, I think, this season there's, one of the one of the most interesting relationships he has is with Kevin Alejandro, who's playing Sebastian Blood, who, if you're a fan of the comics, can probably guess where that's heading. But you know, as it's another interesting relationship in that, you know, they start out as antagonists and then start to form this, you know, this relationship as friends, and those are always the best, you know, villains to spring up. You know, the ones who, you know, start as friends, and you know, there's a lot of that this season. There's a lot of betrayal amongst people, and a lot of things aren't what they seem. And you know, as we know, Oliver sometimes has a blinder to the danger that's, you know, for a smart, savvy guy, sometimes doesn't realize how close the danger really is to him.
The way you guys approached Arrow